Okay, we should be recording now. Yeah, I see the recording icon. Awesome. So thanks everyone for coming to another mixer. We've got an awesome speaker here, Dr. Ball. He's been a VR campus staple these past 5 or so years. 5 years? Oh my gosh. Holy cow. Yeah. And I've been here for all those 5 years too. So I'm really excited for this one. Dr. Ball comes from the Department of Journalism, is also involved in the Institute of Communications Research, as well as you're an informatics faculty affiliate. So Dr. Ball's got his hands across campus and is teaching really interesting topics, all sorts of stuff about XR, AR, VR. So I will give you the floor here, and yeah, if anyone has any questions, will we do a Q&A at the end? Yeah, if there's something awesome, then we'll hold the questions till then. But without further ado, Dr. Ball, please take it away.
Cool. All right. Well, I like to try to keep this as informal as possible. First off, thanks for inviting me. It's always fun to get to chat with you all. Hello, virtual viewers. I guess Rylan. Hello. So I will try to make this angle as flattering as I can. Let me stay relatively in frame here. So basically today I wanted to give a little bit of information on some of the research that I've been working on, as well as some of my thoughts about the future. But before we get going, I wanted to give you all a little bit of information about who I am for those that have not met me yet. A bit of my research over the past few years, what I think maybe is next, that's important that we can keep an eye out for. And then if there's some time, of course, we got some time for Q&A here too. So as Robbie said, I am an assistant professor in the Department of Journalism over in the College of Media. There's quite a few of us over there that are working on the XR space now, as it should be in the College of Media. But in general, I study emerging technologies. So when new stuff comes out, I like to examine it and see what are the social psychological ramifications of those new technologies. But in particular, I like to focus on interactive and immersive media technologies. So things like video games, virtual reality, augmented reality, so on and so forth. That's my personal favorite stuff to examine. And when examining these technologies, one of the things I look at are pro-social uses and effects of interactive and immersive tech. So how can we better use these technologies to educate people or to improve environmental attitudes, conservational attitudes, things like this. So I like to look for ways that we can leverage these new tools for positive pro-social gains. But a lot of my research also is rooted in a digital inequality and inclusion lens. So when new technologies come out, there's all these cool new things we can do with them. But one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that some people will gain access to these technologies before others. They will gain more benefits from these technologies than others. And so I also look at ways that we can try to distribute the benefits of these new technologies as evenly as possible. So I also look at things like virtual reality and augmented reality. Please come in from a digital inequality and inclusion lens. Who has access to this tech and how can we improve access to this tech? And then overall, my hope with my research is that we can try to maximize the benefits of immersive technologies and minimize the negatives of these technologies. So I try to look at both sides of the coin of immersive tech. So I teach, my favorite class ever is augmented and virtual reality. If somebody would like to take that class, I would love to have it. So in essence, in this class, I teach students about immersive technologies. I also teach with immersive technologies. So we learn by using these technologies, playing around with these technologies. And then ultimately, the hope is that we will create content for these technologies as well. So normally on college campuses, immersive tech courses are located in like computer science building and things like that. And of course, that makes sense. And that's great. But I also think we should provide opportunities to learn and create these technologies all over campus. So I teach journalism students on how to leverage these technologies as well. And so in terms of my research over the past few years, as the Oculus Rift started to approach its 10-year anniversary, I was wondering, where are we now with this technology? Where are we at after we've had this explosion in VR tech? And where's the boom that we keep hearing about, things like that? And so I've been wondering, like, what's the temperature of this space? And then, lo and behold, pandemic hit. And so I was somebody that was running virtual reality experiments, doing things like this, and now COVID hit and I couldn't run experiments anymore. I started thinking about, well, I need to shift gears a little. I need to look at something else for a little while during this period of time. And I started to notice a pattern in news articles. So I started to see articles with headlines like this, where it looked like at the start of the pandemic, VR headsets were selling out all over. That made sense to me because technology that allows you to go anywhere and do anything would seem to be really useful in a situation in which none of us can go anywhere or do anything. So it made sense to me that we would see an uptick in virtual reality headset sales at this period of time. Of course, there are other factors that might have contributed, like impacts in supply chains and whatnot. But then I also started to see articles with headlines like this as well, where this is the moment. So we've been talking about the VR boom for a long time. This is one of the best use case scenarios anybody could think of for this technology, and that the pandemic is going to lead to that VR boom. And then I also started to see news articles with headlines like this, where it wasn't just that people were buying virtual reality headsets, it's that people were perhaps trying new things with their virtual reality headsets. Virtual reality headsets up to this point have largely been marketed as gaming devices. I love gaming, that's great. But those of us that have worked in this space, learning in this space, producing in this space, know that it's a lot more than that. Anything that's using a computer today might be using a VR headset in the future. The implications for the tech are tremendous. And it seemed that people were starting to notice that they could use VR headsets for all these other things outside of it. And so I began to wonder, is this the case? What is happening here? Is the COVID-19 pandemic this catalyst? Will it lead to this boom? What are people using these headsets for? And how is the pandemic impacting how people think about and use these headsets? So this led to this current project, where when looking through the literature, we noticed that there was a pretty big gap. There was a bunch of research on the effects of virtual reality. What can we use it for? What is it going to do? But there's far less research on the adoption of virtual reality. Are people going to buy it? Why would they buy it? What are they going to use it for? What are their thoughts about virtual reality? And so the basic premise of the study was,
Minimize the video.
let's see if it will work on my.
Yeah. Top left.
Ooh.
Yeah. Awesome.
Aha. Success. Now let's see if it will still let me click. So basic premise being, VR can't have the widespread societal impact that we all suspect if people aren't using it. So what are people using these VR headsets for? If they're selling out around the pandemic, why? And what are they using it for? So we began what would become a longitudinal study from 2020 to 2022, where we sent out 3 waves of surveys to people online, gathering about 300 responses each year for a total of around 900 people. In 2020, we looked at the uses of VR, and we saw the tier 1 activities that we would expect. Gaming, of course, leading the way there, followed shortly thereafter by video. We then were surprised how many people reported using headsets for things like work, for things like travel, virtual travel, and education? So it would appear that people were more open and trying out these new activities. It's kind of surprised that mental health and socializing and things like this were a little bit lower, along with physical health like exercise and telemedicine, not used nearly as much. Physical health and exercising is one of the things that I was using VR for a lot over the pandemic, but it didn't look like as many people were using it for that as we would have thought. So we have these uses, and there's this diversity of uses in that first year of the pandemic, which was interesting to us. But then we looked at, well, what are the impacts of the pandemic itself? And we found that people that reported that they were impacted by COVID-19 were more likely to use VR for things like working from home, mental health activities, and telemedicine. And people that were impacted by COVID-19 were 2 times more likely to buy a virtual reality headset and buy a high-end virtual reality headset at that. This is important because COVID-19 purchasers, so people that purchased a headset during the pandemic, were more likely to use it for education, working from home, as well as gaming. But what was most interesting to me was those that purchased a high-end headset were more likely to use it for a wide variety of tasks. So gaming and movies, like we would expect, but also socializing, working from home, mental health, and physical health, exercising. So we saw that, well, COVID-19, how it impacted people, did seem to be related to how people were using virtual reality headsets, but also whether they were buying headsets, what they were buying them for, and ultimately those with those high-end headsets had the most diverse uses and potentially gaining the most benefits from these technologies. And so then the question becomes, well, why? So we looked at the technology acceptance model, or TAM. TAM's very simplistic. The theoretical way of saying it is very parsimonious. And so that's one of the reasons why I like it. And it looks at why do people adopt, use, accept technologies based on 2 core characteristics. One, is that technology useful to somebody? 2, is that technology easy to use, which will ultimately influence people's acceptance or views on that technology. And we found that that wasn't the case with our data, that those that felt VR was useful and easy to use, more likely to want to use that technology. But then we found that those impacts from the useful variable were stronger. So being easy to use is important to people. But what was most important to people was VR useful. So how does this relate to the pandemic? Well, those people that were impacted by COVID-19 were more likely to view VR as useful, and they were more likely to view VR as easy to use, with usefulness being the more important factor. So people that were most impacted, stuck at home, things like this, were more likely to see VR as useful, and that would ultimately lead to them wanting to use it to some extent. So we saw this relationship between COVID-19 and the pandemic and these technology acceptance variables. And so we wanted to check over time, does this model hold up over time? And it did. In 2020, 2021, and 2022, this model persisted, just like this. That was surprising to us because we started to get vaccines, people started to leave the house again, things like this. We would have thought that the impacts of COVID-19 would have disappeared or at least diminished substantially by the time we got to 2022, didn't. So that means the impacts of COVID-19, of course, are felt by all of us still, and the ripple effect and ramifications for how people perceive virtual reality seems to be persistent. Now, it is weakening slightly over time. but the ripple effects are going out much further than we would have thought. So another thing we wanted to look at was VR experience and VR ownership and how that impacts people's perceptions of this technology. You all know virtual reality is something that is very difficult to talk to people about. It is very difficult to show them a video of it or a picture of it. It's something that people need to experience for themselves. And so we wanted to see how experience played into this model. And we found that people that had VR experience did, feel that VR was more useful, and that did impact their intention to use it. But surprisingly, having that VR experience did not have a relationship whether or not it was perceived as easy to use. So one way to possibly interpret this is that when people get their hands on VR, they do have that aha moment, oh, I could use this for a bunch of things. I want to use this for a bunch of things. But it's a little bit more complicated to use than the marketing would have led me to believe. You all have been in this space for a while. You all have seen the arc where VR has gotten a whole heck of a lot easier to use over the past 5 years. My first study in VR was with the HTC Vive, and I had to set up all those base stations all over the place. Really high quality stuff. It's a nightmare to take from place to place, set up. And now, pop on my MetaQuest 3, few minutes, I'm good to go. So while that's easy for me as a good old fashioned nerd, it would appear that when people get their hands on this tech, quite as easy to set up as they would think. Now, so this is what played out in 2020, but then something really interesting happened in 2021. This model happened, where suddenly having virtual reality led to a negative perception that VR was useful and a negative impact on whether or not it was easy to use. So there was a backlash where suddenly people had access to this tech were like, this stuff's not as useful as I thought it was going to be. And it's certainly not as easy as I thought it was going to be. In 2021, we have the opposite of it. And then in 2022, model reemerges back to it's useful, but no relationship with ease. So what does this mean? Well, it would appear that at the start of the pandemic, there was indeed a VR boom in 2020. A lot of entertainment industries experienced this. Video game industry also experienced a boom during this period of time. Everybody's trapped at home. And one of the things that was encouraging to me during this boom is it wasn't just people buying VR headsets, which is great. It's also people using VR headsets for a wide variety of tasks, which I think is also great. But it would seem that that boom from 2020 led to a small bust in 2021. So we were wondering why. And that led us to what's called the Gartner hype cycle. Some of you may have heard of it before in conversations with these types of technologies. So Gartner's research group released this hype cycle figure where, in essence, when a new technology comes out, which is called the technology trigger, everybody thinks it's going to change the world. It's going to change everything. Everybody has this peak inflated expectations for what it's going to do. And then we all realize that it actually kind of sucks. It's not as cool as we thought it was going to be. It's probably not going to change the whole world. Maybe it's just going to fade away into oblivion. And that is the trough of disillusion. We all give up. It's not so good. But then the faithful persist, and we figure out, what are we actually going to use this technology for? What is it good for? And this leads us up through the slope of enlightenment and eventually this plateau of productivity where we figure out, what is this tech? What are we going to use it for? How is it going to integrate into our lives? And that's when it becomes yourself. Something that's just with you all the time. You use it all the time. But as I tell my students, I am so old. I remember the first time I saw somebody use an iPhone. Vivid. Why? Because I was so shocked by how badass it was. The same way people are shocked by VR now. Smartphone. Now it's everywhere. That's the productivity plateau. Now, people talk about the Gartner hype all the time. But there's not a lot of research to back this model up. We thought maybe we had some that could, where maybe what we're seeing here is something along these lines. 2020, pandemic is happening, everything's going terribly. VR is going to help me get through this. It's going to be amazing. Everybody had those peak expectations for this technology, but then they realized, it's not quite as good as I thought. And then by the time we get to 2022, people were like, okay, well, not as good as I thought it was gonna be, still pretty good. So maybe we see this small scale hype cycle occurring. And that's when we started to wonder, this Gartner hype cycle that looks at the lifespan essentially of a technology from introduction to adoption. Maybe it's not a hype cycle. Maybe it's hype cycles. Maybe these blips happen over time for a technology like VR. VR has been around for a long time, way before Oculus development kits started hitting the market. We have tried to get this technology off the ground for a while. Pops up, looks like it's got a lot of potential, drops down, disappears, goes into what we would call hibernation for a little while. Technology gets better, starts to look like it might be feasible again, reemerges, people get excited, fails, goes back into hibernation. But since Oculus came out, that landscape changed. It's not going anywhere this time. It's not disappearing anymore. And so maybe what we're seeing is that during big moments in the development of this technology now, result in these spikes of interest and excitement. And then we level off a little bit, but over time, we're getting closer and closer to adoption, closer and closer to that plateau of productivity. So, for example, I suspect that we would have had blips in this heartbeat when the Oculus Kickstarter was such a huge success, when you could finally go into a Best Buy and buy a VR headset, when VR became wireless. All these events leading to resurgences and interest and possibilities with this technology, improving people's awareness of what it is, what it can do, but never quite getting to that boom level where everybody has one. And so if this pattern is happening over time, what would be the next blip? Probably yes. Cue epic 2001 Space Odyssey music. There's a problem. We're going through a blip right now, I suspect, where suddenly these technologies have once again been pushed into the limelight in a big way. Everybody's talking about them. That's great. I think that's another step on our way for widespread understanding of what these technologies can do. So they announced this headset, and I, the nerd, of course, was watching in anticipation for this new tech. This is one of the key pivotal moments. This is up there with Development Kit 1. Big moment. But will that cycle continue? Just keep going. Will it once again dip back down after Apple Vision Pro? What breaks that hype cycle? How do we get to that plateau and stay there? According to our research, it's not just hardware. We can make the hardware easier to use, make it cheaper, do those things. And those things matter. Our research shows it matters. But remember, when we were looking at that data, easy was important. What people really cared about was it useful? That is software. We can make the hardware as good as we can make it. But without the software to make it useful, we're probably not going to be able to break free of this cycle. And so when Apple enters into the arena, their headset, of course, people make fun of it, it's got some problems, some interesting design decisions. Well, I'm excited about that headset, care less about the hardware. It wasn't iPhone that changed everything. It was the App Store that changed everything. So if this popular bit of tech can bring developers to figure out the one challenge that we've been trying to deal with for the entire lifetime of this technology, which is not how do we keep making it better, it's how do we make it useful. And Apple is very good at that. So what app will demonstrate the usefulness of this technology to everybody around the world? And that brings me to what I like to call the hunt for VRs. Coming soon to Netflix. So how many of you heard the killer app term before? Comment in the lexicon. Killer apps. We talk about killer apps. Oh, wow, Xbox has Halo. That's the killer app. I'm realizing that that's a really dated reference. I'm so old. There was a time where everybody was talking about Halo is going to change everything. So what's the killer app now? I don't know. I like Elden Ring. Whatever. Sidetrack. So what's VR's killer app? For us to even try to guess that, which can be a fool's errand, we have to talk about, well, what is a killer app more specifically? Killer app is a piece of software that proves the core value of a technology, essentially proves its usefulness to people. And as Stephen Levy said in 1985, it is software that does something that for a while at least can only be done on that machine. Which brings me to our good old friend, Apple. Back to Apple. So there was a time, this is before even my time, where computers, tough set, where that was the VR, where that was the cutting edge thing that people were like, come on, what am I going to use this thing? Why would I need a computer in my life? You're trying to sell me a multi-$1,000 computer? That's how you're trying. So if you're going through that now with VR, well, Steve Jobs went through that too. What I need this for is not useful to me. So what was the killer app that led us from people didn't want a computer in their life to now our whole society runs on? How did we get from that point where this was a tough sell to this was indispensable part of your life? One of the reasons is the killer app. So does anybody know what the killer app was on the Apple II? It's kind of a surprise. It's not Halo. It's VizCalc. VizCalc is Excel spreadsheet. Old school Excel spreadsheet. VizCalc is one of the reasons why you all have laptops. A spreadsheet. Spreadsheets. I hate spreadsheets. This changed everything. So to give you some context, Doug Green said when VizCalc came out for the Apple II, it is a reason enough to own a computer. This thing might be expensive, but you won't believe what a spreadsheet. You gotta get one. It was so popular that one newspaper said the Apple II computer is a very expensive VizCalc accessory. That's the only reason I have a computer. But let's take it even further. One, Ted Nelson said VizCalc represented a new idea of a way to use a computer and a new way of thinking about the world. Excel spreadsheet. They were talking about Excel spreadsheet, and they said it changes everything. Changed everything because it was very useful. The only reason we were able to work from home during the pandemic is suddenly stuff you had to do at the office, you could do at home. You could suddenly keep records. You could change and predict and see future of data. You could make a change in this cell and it would have a ripple effect and change all the information from other cells. Now keep in mind, before VizCalc, we were doing this kind of ledger management stuff by hand. So you have a giant ledger, giant piece of paper, whole bunch of numbers on it. Oh, I didn't carry the one here. Erase whole sheets. VisCalc lets you make a change and it would then adapt to that new information. So this is why it was a new way of thinking about computing. So a spreadsheet was a killer app. And I think that that is a pretty important lesson for it. It's hard to predict what killer apps will be, but also highlights needs to be useful. This allowed people to work from home. That was very useful. So people started to buy computers, then we end up here. Now we're here. Spatial computing, the era of spatial computing has begun. These are the same definitions all of us in this room have been using for a while. But Apple's gonna do Apple things, and they're just gonna put a little new branding on it. One of the reasons why they put a new branding on it is because they're trying to distance themselves from the game-centric perception that VR and AR had up till now. They want you to know that this device is $3,500. They also want you to know not at all. This is the next step in computing. This is the next step. We have personal computers at home. We have cell phones in our pocket. And the next thing is going to be spatial computing. But when looking at their introduction to Apple Vision Pro video here, have to wonder, back to our killer app. Killer apps, 4 distinct features. Is it unique? Is it useful? Is this unique? Is it useful? It looks like big monitors. So I work in a journalism department. While I'm watching this video, I clap with glee as I see that Apple recognizes the importance of news in this new space and puts a news article about Black women and non-binary artists in the Waco Theater in this really great piece. And they show somebody reading this great piece in their Apple Vision Pro. And when I look at this, I'm so excited journalism is represented. We have a seat at the table. They know that this is going to be an important way to share news. But I have to wonder, making useful. I can read that news much easier by doing this. I don't need to strap this thing in my head. This is just a website, but bigger. And we've been shrinking down our screens for a while. So I don't know if I need a website. I don't know if that's useful. And I certainly don't know if that's justifiable $3,500 bill. So while I'm excited, we have a seat at the table, I think this is an interim step. I think a lot of what people complain about with this tech is because it is an interim step. And I think this representation of the future of spatial computing is iterative. We've been trained to use screens for our whole lives, our laptop screens, our phone screens. We are very much trapped within this frame. Now we have the potential to break free from this frame. And what do? We recreate the frame. Well, we've seen this with cinema and things like that. First, cinema recreated the format of a play. It wasn't until later that we figured out, wait a minute, it's not just a stage, you can move the camera around, do different things. And we can with this tech too. So this is interim. What I want to do is I want to be able to pull a piece of art from that story and I want it to be in the room with me. I want to be able to hold an object from that exhibit. I want to be able to look at it. I want to be able to rotate it in my hands. Or better yet, I want to step into that website and I want to go to that Waco Theater, which is what I did in VR. So I traveled to the street and that is the theater right there. So I can look around, I can see the environment. I can't go in because they didn't think that part of it. So I teach my students, we're going to film inside. And when we have our news stories, people are going to be able to pull those objects out. They're going to be able to go inside of our stories. So we have to think differently about the content we create for future, whether it's spatial computing or what have you. But a lot of this required fancy tech to do. So if you want to create a virtual tour of an art exhibit, you're probably going to have to use specialized equipment like an omnidirectional camera here that I teach my students how to use. They're great. They've gotten pretty cheap. They're not the best. They'll get there. Still a buy-in that a lot of people aren't going to be willing to pay after they just dropped $3,500 on their headset. So I watched the Apple Vision Pro and I was excited about it. But I didn't really lean forward in my chair was shock and awe until a few weeks later, when they announced the iPhone 15 Pros were going to be able to shoot spatial video. We're going to be able to use these two cameras in landscape to capture 3D footage of phones. That's when I was like, oh, that could be big. Now we don't need a specialized camera to create immersive content anymore. Millions of people will gain the ability to create immersive content that never even considered creating it before. And as Chase Jarvis said, the best camera is the camera that you have with you. And now the camera that we all have in our pocket very soon could be able to shoot immersive video. That turns our phones to a mobile immersive studio. That could be really good. Maybe, just maybe, that's one of the things. The ability to capture and communicate experience in a new way. And maybe not just consuming immersive content, but creating, sharing it. Growing up with social media, thankfully I got out the game before that was too big. We're used to sharing your lives. And we haven't really been able to do that with VR yet. You all bring people into this space and you show it to them one at a time. But what if you could share your life with loved ones, family members, friends with this tech, immersively? Maybe that's the killer feature. It's one of the ones for me. First video I ever took, bought iPhone 15 Pro specifically for the feature. I just took a video of my daughter eating Chick-fil-A that was too hot in a Chick-fil-A restaurant. I was just like, oh yeah, let me try out this new special video. And now that 20-second clip is one of my favorite clips I've ever taken. Because this, surprisingly enough, it's not bullshit. It does feel like a memory. And if we could share those memories, share those experiences, we get to the core of what this technology can do, communicate experience, then maybe that's what gets people really into it. I say that full well knowing predicting killer apps is very difficult. That could very much be wrong. But this is my killer app. If I buy an Apple Vision Pro, it will be 100% to do this. So, when talking about these new technologies, new seems weird to use for a technology that's approaching its 10-year anniversary. We kept looking for that big boom where suddenly everybody's going to have a VR headset, and that hasn't happened. If anything, feels belittled, written off, but it's persistent, stayed around. They kept that torch burning. And when looking at history of disruptive technologies, technologies that changed everything, you can imagine there's a lot of people pretty invested in how things were done before. We don't want everything to be changed. Industries resist those kind of changes for the most part. And so that means when this kind of new tech comes out, oftentimes it is dismissed as a toy. Much the same way VR has been minimized and dismissed over the past decade. But that disruption happens eventually. It just might take more time than people expect. People think that this happened overnight. I watched somebody answer a call on a smartphone for the first time. It was a while before I had one. So we get dismissed as a toy, but that disruption still occurs. When we look in history, something like the automobile, it took 30 years before that disrupted horse-drawn carriage. If we look at something like the telephone wasn't adopted quickly either. Part of it is these new technologies have a period of time where they can't quite meet people's expectations. They're not quite as useful as people want them to be. Telephone's a prime example. Western Union did not adopt the telephone. They're like, no, we're good. We can't see any way to use this. They passed on the telephone. They had good reason. Telephone at the time could only transmit information about a mileage. No, we need that. We deal with railroads. We need more than a mileage. At first, the telephone was not good enough. it was not useful enough for people to adopt. Now it's everywhere. So VR might be dismissed as a toy, but we're approaching that point where can we figure this problem out? Can we figure out how to make this tech useful? And I know everybody in this room's got some ideas. And that's what really excites me because disruption takes time and adoption's not linear. I don't think we're going to get to that point where suddenly everybody's just got a VR headset. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a while because we're disrupting everything with this potential. Which means we need people like you to think through and produce those killer apps, killer experiences. We need people that are thinking about the potential of this technology in a way that makes this technology useful and unique. Reading a news article. Do that on my phone. Do that on my laptop. Do that on my tab. Experiencing a news article. Only do that here. So we have to find those instances. We got to figure out what's our business. What's going to really sell? Maybe it's capturing, communicating experiences. That's it for me. But we don't all just use our computers for an Excel spreadsheet. I avoid it at all costs. We use it for a bunch of things. So more useful applications will come later on. But we still have some work to do to figure out which are the ones right now to really sell people on. I'll buy this stuff. I'll buy this stuff every year they keep. But when does it get to the point when my parents want to buy this? When does it get to the point that my neighbor wants to buy this? And that's why I think it's also important that we keep an eye on people's acceptance and adoption of this technology. What do they want to use it for? And what do they not even know they want to use it for that we can produce here and show them? That's our business. So with that, thank you so much for your time and inviting me to chat with you all. We have a few minutes for question, conversation, whatever. Again, I keep it relatively informal. So anything that you all are thinking about. What's useful to you? Yeah.
So, as you mentioned, it's difficult to predict what would be a killer app or when that killer app may come out. But do you think there may be a relation between access to this technology? Like say Apple releases a Vision Non-Pro that's at a cheaper starting price. Would that be a more likely starting point to, like whenever that happens, could that be a signaling a killer app coming soon?
We would hope. So one of the interesting dilemmas that we get into with these kinds of new technologies is what I like to call chicken and egg. So we keep building better and better tech. And then we hope that if we make it good enough, the developers will come in and they'll make the software that makes it useful. And so Meta keeps revising the Quest. They make the Quest Pro, they try all these different models, they try all these different things. And every single time they hope that this is the moment where everybody comes in and everybody starts using the VR headset. It's not enough, as you see, to attract them. So what do we need? We need the software first, hardware. And that's the trickiest balancing of what needs to happen first. I think Apple Vision, we'll call it Apple Vision 4. The one for me, Apple Vision 4, when that comes out, that is going to drive a lot more interest into this. And that's why with the Apple Vision Pro right now, I don't even feel like it's made for us at all. I think it's made as a test scenario. Here, developers, here's what's coming, and it will be cheap, and people will be interested if you can figure out how to use this. How can you use this effectively? What's the app store? What's the situation in which there's a selection of things that people can do? So they've built the road, now we've got to build the car on. And I do think they're going to be here changing the landscape. They've already directed a lot of attention to this space. The ripple effects are going to be widespread for a while. But right now, almost by design, it's cost prohibitive. It's not super easy. It's something you can't really show to grandmother easily. It's very customized to individual users, things like that. Broken. I think when we get to that lower tier Apple Vision, hopefully that leads to another blip, another spike, another increased interest. And if Pro has worked and got into enough developer hands, this time blip goes up, we'll find something useful. That's when we get to the point. If there's nothing for them when they buy it, it'll sit on a shelf or get returned. Not enough just right? You want people to use it. So is there going to be something there that is worthy of keeping people's attention? So I feel like Apple Vision Pro very much a targeted decision where they're like, okay, it's flawed, it's got a battery pack and paper, and it's really heavy and all this sort of thing, but we have to get it out there so that people can start thinking outside of this frame. Because right now, they're showing people videos of big websites. Who wants $3,500 for a big website? Nobody's gonna pay that for a big website. But people don't even understand what it could be. What does a post website look like? What does the post screen world look like? We're not even gonna be able to figure that out until we start playing in this space. And unfortunately, that means playing with cost prohibitive, very expensive technology. But as with everything, Apple Vision will drop down. They'll keep it expensive. It's out there. But it will drop down to hopefully a price that I can convince my wife to let me buy. But we've got a ways to go. I've already tried many times. I will keep trying. I keep saying, like, but it's my job. It's my job. You gotta let me. We'll get there. But yeah, it's a complicated relationship between what comes first, hardware, software. Hardware's got to get there. Does it have the support? I think this support is different from anything we've seen since the smartphone. Because we have to rethink. Just like we had to rethink computing. We used to do computing in a lab at work. So computing was something that we did in a place that wasn't a home. Personal computers came out, we started doing computing at home. It changed everything. Now I can attend a Zoom meeting in my pajamas. That's cool. How we think about computing changes with the context. And then we started computing then. We rethought how we interact with technology on a mobile scale. Everything's on this small screen that at your fingertips, very quick, things like this. Now we've got to rethink computing again. Rethink computing to be all around us, spatially, 3 dimensions. That's a big intellectual leap. It's a lot of work for a developer to figure out. But we're going to get there because now we've got you that have already been thinking about what that future might look like, that have already seen Ready Player One and said, yeah, it does look kind of cool. Let's do that. Let's make that happen. I've seen sci-fi become real many times in my relatively short lifespan. Let's avoid Black Mirror if we can, but there's some cool stuff. I want to do car racing with Deadpool. That'd be cool. Let's get on that. So now we have people that are being trained and are thinking about these technologies, not just what they can do today, what they can do 5 years, 10 years. And it's a challenging problem, but I've seen us solve a lot of it. So we'll get there. And Apple, I think, will play a big role, if anything, raising the standards, raising the resolution, for example, is already going to have an impact on the camera. Cameras shoot 5.7K. The camera I showed you shoots at 5.7K. Sounds like a lot. When you put it all around you, it's not. Pretty grainy. Apple just patented a technique to stream much higher resolution footage right to the Apple Pro. So that means now the Apple Pro will be able to see footage on the fly, much higher resolution. I can guarantee you. Next step will be cameras that can do that. So they'll race, they'll exchange, one technology, one company will push the boundary, the others will meet it. And that's how we'll end up in a race similar to things like GPU that'll got us here to begin with. So Apple will be the pace car for the foreseeable future. Be the pace car, but they'll also attract a lot of attention. When they attract a lot of attention, developers will be like, I want to make something that people will pay for with all that attention. Everybody's looking at the Apple Vision Pro. What are they going to buy when they get it? Everybody's got $3,500 lying around. They're just waiting to buy some apps. I want to be that. I want to be the discount that everybody that buys an Apple Vision Pro also buys that. For example, how many of you have bought Beat Saber? Beat Saber. So you want to be that software, right? The software that everybody buys with their headset. What's Apple Vision Pro equivalent? It's like, oh, you gotta try that Apple Vision Pro because of this. And now we don't have that big website. So that's not it's cool, but not going to do it. But it's step one. It's a very, 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 very long, drawn out reply. I don't even know if I answered. Complicated, I guess is the answer. Any other comments, questions, concerns? What do you think is most useful about this? How are you guys? Yeah.
And we've been using like rectangles and squares forever, like tablets, the pages. Now we have like screens. Like that's been thousands of years though, like rectangles. In VR, like you're saying, we're trying to go beyond that, but I don't think we've ever left rectangles.
You are right now.
Like that's like
Right now, we are free from the rectangle. And that's one of the interesting things about looking at how we've used technology and media this whole time. Is the way I look at it is we've adapted to media this whole time. You don't know how to read until somebody. So what's on that? You don't know until somebody teaches you how to do it. It's not intuitive, it's not natural. We adapt to the media. We learn how to read it. But now, for the first time, we're on the precipice of what if our media adapted to us? What if we interacted with the digital world the way we interact with this world? What if we weren't trying to figure out, because imagine the spatial reasoning, and we can do it. We can do it very effectively. We can imagine what the depth is on a picture. We can imagine what it looks like in real life. But the cognitive processing that is taken to do that, imagine a picture of what it would look like in real life. I'm imagining myself there. I'm imagining what it would be like to feel the breeze and to see in 3 dimensions. If we cut out that cognitive load, and it wasn't. What if instead of imagining a scene in a book, walked around the scene? So I see it as a pivotal, fundamental flip in how we interact with technology, how we interact with media in a way that is natural, because we know how to walk around, we know how to see, we know how to judge distance without being taught this. And now we can potentially interact with the digital world without having to taught that stuff. First time, because we have been confined to the rectangle for a very, very long time. And one of the biggest challenges we face is what does breaking free from that rectangle look like? And is it worth it? If the rectangle, very efficient. I can read that news story much faster on this phone than on that headset. For now. So we have to make that switch worthy. So good point, good question. And you don't know yet. I'm just saying, I could be totally wrong. So I could be wrong. Maybe we decide rectangles are the way to go. Maybe. All right. So that time.
That's awesome.
We did it.
Dr. Wall, thank you so much for coming, talking to us and everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you all online through.
All right, at that, we will conclude the recording. So if anyone wants to, if anyone missed any part of that, it'll be up online by tomorrow. Thanks for joining us from home. I will stop that. I gotta use this mouse. I will stop that now. There we go.